Hello, everybody. My name is Francisco Palos, and today I will be discussing my research proposal on the induction of mask in official NBA matches. So, looking at the title, we're going to be looking at the effect that masks have on the efficiency of professional basketball players. And when I mean masks, I do not refer to the ones equipped during the COVID pandemic. I'll be more looking into the ones you see in the image to the left. We're going to be discussing the masks that cover around the eyes and just a bit over the nose and kind of ends right where the cheeks end. So just to keep in mind during the presentation, I'll be referring to these as the face masks in question. So our first or only research question is, does wearing a mask hinder the ability for the basketball player uh, in terms of scoring, defense, and all aspects of the game? So we're gonna question the idea of, does a mask that cover your eyes but also provide protection hinder your performance? As we've seen very few occasions where um, NBA players were allowed to wear a mask, but this was due to medical reasons, such as after a facial injury that required more time to heal, but these players decided that they wouldn't want to wait the full duration of the healing period. So instead wanted to equip a mask that would still protect them while in this healing process. So little bit of background information: about 22% of all NBA players during their career will experience some sort of injury. 13% of those injuries are face related. As you can imagine, basketball being one of the more physical sports with that tend to have the least amount of gear provided to the players to protect them from these said injuries. Um, when asked about the facial or the permitting of the facial masks, there has been no official response by the league officials stating reason why they do not allow basketball players to wear a mask that for non-related purposes. So, such as for possible matches where players decide on their shoes they wear, headbands, where while here we're looking at why they're not allowed to wear the mask when they want to just have it on during their games. So part two of the background, we're going to be looking at how um, only, as mentioned, only a few guards or players have worn said masks for non-medical related reasons in, in 75 years. So we have a very small pool of data that I was able to collect for this research proposal. Um, every player who has worn a mask have different experiences and opinions. But one quote from Richard Hamilton, when asked about the idea of wearing the mask, he pretty much summarized in the quote saying that it was a part of his uniform. Like, it did not hinder him. It felt like as if it was a necessity to wear during the game. This could possibly be because of the protection it allows for the player, as well as probably a boost in confidence and performance, as it's been mentioned that people are willing to do more or exit out of their comfort zone when behind a mask. So, in that sort of thinking, we're going to be looking at, does a mask provide that player a boost of confidence, or like a placebo effect, really? Does the mask give them superpowers or a stronger mentality when playing these games? So the idea or the whole reason behind this research proposal refers back to these very few instances where players wore these masks for non-related purposes and had what they recorded was probably some of the better games during their entire career. So our specific aims, well, why doesn't the NBA permit players to wear masks, especially since the goal or one of the mottos of the league is to protect its players and employees, especially since it is a sport and injuries kind of go along with sports. So it's quite shocking not to have the league already put so much time and effort into looking for more ways to protect their players. Um, Reported cases, as mentioned from our current knowledge while collecting our data, there's obviously no protection of the face for players. There's no goggles, no masks, no headgear that players are allowed to wear during their matches. So their head is prone to injuries, especially when we're looking at players driving in to the paint for like dunking scores. That tends to be where players have the most physical contact during the game. So the hypothesis of the research proposal is if you provide these players the option to wear a mask, does the mask allow them to perform better because they have something protecting their face? So there's nothing really has stopping them from just diving through defenders to score, make a dunk, because I would assume that the ability to protect yourself would ensure your mentality that I am able to go through these individuals, these defenders, and avoid any facial injuries, as most basketball players or any sports athletes will tend to focus on the whole protecting themselves and ensuring that they're able to play next week's games or even the game that's scheduled for tomorrow. So the long-term goal is providing the protection for these said players, as well as it probably even increase the skill of game if every player has the option to wear a mask, and if they perform a lot better with a mask, we can see high level of play for the game of basketball, as everyone would be playing at 110% of their capabilities. Another long-term goal is it'll probably create a new source of income for the league, as we already know sports tend to have huge fans for their jerseys, their shoes, headbands, uh, you name it. So with the introduction of a mask, we can have a new source of income where fans would probably want to be buying these custom-made face masks that basketball players are creating, such as how they create their personal shoe brands. So with the induction of mass, we can see a new way for the league to create income. So the significance, as I already mentioned, we're providing protection for said players. Uh, Looking at other sports such as football, baseball, and hockey, they have gear that protects the player while allowing them to maneuver as much as possible. So the sort of middle ground between protection and efficiency obviously was considered for these other sports, whereas in basketball, we don't have that much protection for our players. So they're at risk for irreversible injuries that can end their careers. This can solve the low profit years, whereas every sport tends to have years where their income or their profit margins don't meet their requirements. So we see, cuttage of employees. We see dropping of players, coaches, staffs, just to make the salary cap or the allowed budget for the team. So because I mean the league runs as a pot really, where the the league gets obtains all this money for the budget for the entire league, splits it into 32, and then those 32 teams have to structure their team around the amount of money given to them by the league. So with lower profit years, we see less money for teams to spend, meaning they have to make cuts. So with more money coming in, we'll see less of that, allowing more teams to maintain their teams at a better state. We're introducing new gear for players to wear to avoid injuries. So pretty much as mentioned in the first bullet point, just the idea of protecting our players should be one of the highlights of any sport league really. And the number of case-related face injuries will probably reach all-time lows. as we now have something that's protecting players from getting an elbow to the face or ball getting tossed and just right there forehead. So innovation, well, how this research proposal differs from others, well, we're going to be looking at primarily um, production of the player. We're not going to be looking at the VO2 max. We're not looking at blood pressure. We're not looking at the like very micro numbers of the human body. We're instead looking at the broader production of the body. So we're going to be looking at their performance in the game of basketball. So just like every fan, we like to look at the points, rebounds, assists, turnovers, steals, blocks, everything like that. So we're primarily looking at the more conventional way of stat collecting, which is observing the game and seeing how they perform. Um, we're going to be utilizing pretty much like an independent t-test, factorials, ANOVAs, and two independent factors. With these methods, we'll be crossing different data from different groups, because in the approach section, I'll be discussing how this um, proposal will be done. And with these observations and methods, we'll be able to utilize the data correctly and ensure that we're not, leaving any major gaps in our data. So our approach, how are we gonna, ensure or propose and support our hypothesis? Well, it's kind of split into two parts. The first part, we'll be looking at data that's that's been there for a while. So we're going to be looking at players who have already played their games using a face mask. So as I already mentioned, only a handful of players have used a face mask during official NBA games. So we'll be taking a roughly about 9 players who have worn these face masks and compare those stats from those games with the mask on to games right before and right after that chosen game. So we can have data before the mask and after the mask and see if there's any significant changes in their game. Uh, we do though have to record and leave note of the strength of opponent, as obviously not every basketball team plays the same opponent in a week. So we will have to consider the strength into our data collection to ensure that the performance equates to the opponent, as basketball players tend to perform a lot better against um, weaker teams. So by balancing and ensuring that the strengths are noted, or ensuring the fair ground and the performances are solely based off of um, the capability at the moment. So as I said, we're going to be looking at the field goal percentages, 3-point percentages, free throws, and etc. of the game of basketball to ensure that we are not only looking at scoring, as scoring is just only such a minor part of the game of basketball. So the second part of the approach is we're going to be doing a current um, data collection. So we'll be having 9 players participating. They can not be older than the age of 32, must reach the required heights for designated positions, as I've already calculated the averages for each position in the NBA league. So for example, we would like to have a 6'3" individual plays for point guard, and 6'7" for power forward, and 7 foot for center. So realistically, we're looking for 3 of each position, with all 3 of them, being less than 32, reach the required height, as well as hopefully having the 3 years of pro level, to ensure that these individuals have the same amount of experience as a 10-year vet will have probably more skills, or I guess notes on how to play the game, compared to an individual who's only been in the game for about 2-3 years. So making sure that they only have 3 years of pro play, ensure of fairness, and less chance of standard error. Uh, and lastly, of course, they cannot have any current injuries, as we do not want and injury manipulating our data, as the data pretty much requires the player to be at full maximum health. Um, so further explaining the experiment, it will be 4 games a week with a day of rest in between for 2 weeks. Um, 1 week of full rest in between those 2 weeks of play, so 3 weeks in total, to ensure players are not fatigued for the next game scheduled. 48 minutes of play, like a typical game of NBA basketball, split into 4 quarters, meaning it's about 12 minutes per quarter. Each team given a set number of timeouts, which is about 7, and only one player on the team will be given a mask to wear. So what I mean by that is we'll have 2 teams play each other. One team might have their point guard have the mask, whereas the other team might have their center. With such variety, we're ensuring our data is covering a broad um, amount of possibilities that could result in an error. So by ensuring that only one person from each team wears a mask and mixing up the role of who wears that mask, we're pretty much covering our grounds for every scenario that could possibly have happened during the first part of the experiment when collecting those 9 previous players, as those 9 players obviously play different positions, different set of rules for basketball, different play making, etc. So with this template for an experiment, we're ensuring the least amount of standard error as possible. Uh, Obviously, as mentioned, the amount of variables that can alter the data is, you know, there's a ton of it. Where you have to worry about, how the pressure placed on these players during these games, as for example, players in an NBA's finals have more weight on their shoulders, so they have the whole stadium looking at them. They might be, shaking, they might be nervous, and that might affect their efficiency during the game. So obviously pressure plays a role in the efficiency of players, with a face mask. The fatigue, as some games require more from that player, so they're not able to provide the same amount of I guess I'm blanking on not power, but um, they can't really give it their all, because just the day before they played all 48 minutes. So fatigue plays play calling. Every team has a different playbook, so uh, each playbook requires that player to play a certain way. So, for example, you have one player who's being given the ball as many times as possible, meaning their scoring might be a lot better compared to a playbook where they have their player be super team oriented, where they're passing the ball as much as they can. So one might have a better scoring, whereas the other might have better team assists, rebounds. So play calling obviously plays a major role in our data. Synergy, players obviously, whether or not they like their teammates, can alter the way they play. If they're always bickering with one teammate, then their relationship when passing the ball, defending one another is gonna it's gonna alter the data. And then obviously the type of opponents and etc. So ton of variables, but with our method, we're avoiding as much of it as possible. So by ensuring ample time of rest, keeping the participants within the same team so they can build that chemistry, build the synergy with that team. So it's not like they're playing with somebody new every single game. They have the sort of coherentness, the bond that keeps them playing well together, as well as creating the multiple scenarios. As mentioned, we're having one player from each team wear a mask, and that player's position being different in each game ensures that every scenario is covered, so that our data is covering any possible uh, matchup scenario and or variable that's thrown at it. And that is my references. Hopefully, as mentioned, the long term is providing protection, the improve the skill of the game of basketball, as well as the um, generating income for the league. Thank you.